Welcome to the Provincial Grand Lodge of Markmaster Masons of Middlesex. My name is Michael Karn, and I have over time researched various aspects of the Mark degree and its history. I wrote a book a short while ago with the title Mark and Art Talks, which gives various explanations about the degree and is published so that 10-minute talks can be given at a lodge meeting. What I would like to do now is present one of the talks, to which I have added PowerPoint images. In 1851, the only Mark Lodge known to be working in England was in London and irregular. It was the Bon Accord Mark Lodge that had been granted a warrant by the Scottish Bon Accord Royal Arch Chapter, number 70 of Aberdeen. The new Mark Lodge in England was a success, balloting for 18 candidates at the first meeting, of which 6 were advanced that same day. The Bon Accord chapter, however, did not have the authority to grant such a warrant in England, and for that reason, there was a dispute between the Bon Accord chapter and the Supreme Grand Chapter of Scotland, the chapter being accused of acting without authority in issuing the warrant. All efforts by the Scottish Grand Chapter to retrieve the warrant failed, probably because the new Bon Accord Mark Lodge in London was proving to be very popular. As a result of the dispute, the Bon Accord chapter was suspended by the Supreme Grand Chapter of Scotland, along with all the members. This left the London Bon Accord Mark Lodge in a situation that, with their mother chapter suspended, they no longer had a valid warrant. But this did not stop them from continuing to meet and indeed being successful. Mark Masonry became very popular in London, with some 158 members being advanced in the first 5 years from 1851 to 1856. This situation was not overlooked by the Supreme Grand Chapter of Scotland, who, having observed the desire among Masons in England to practice Mark Masonry, appointed a committee to consider what steps could be taken to aid them without impinging on the privilege of the Supreme Grand Chapter of England. But this did not appear to have bothered the Scottish Grand Chapter too much, because in October 1855, the committee recommended issuing warrants to Mark Lodges in England, and this was confirmed in December of that year. The tactic saw Scotland founding 19 Mark Lodges in England and Wales, and the formation of the Mark province of Lancashire. However, the month before, that is in November 1855, the United Grand Lodge and Supreme Grand Chapter of England had formed a joint committee to review the situation of Mark Masonry in England and Wales. As a result, in February 1856, the committee reported the following points. The Mark Mason degree does not form a portion of the Royal Arch degree. It is not essential to craft masonry. There is nothing objectionable in the degree. It might be considered as a graceful addition to the Fellowcraft degree. The question of its introduction into masonry be left to the Grand Lodge of England. This report was considered by the Board of General Purposes and resulted in the following proposition being put to the United Grand Lodge of England on the 5th of March, 1856. The board submit to the consideration of Grand Lodge the propriety of declaring that the degree of Markman and Markmaster is not at variance with the ancient landmarks of the order, and that the degree shall be in addition to and form part of the Fellowcraft degree, and may consequently by all regular warranted lodges under such regulations as may be suggested by the Board of General Purposes, approved and sanctioned by the most worshipful Grand Master. The resolution was voted upon without dissent or opposition. This was an important change to the standing of the Mark degree, now recognised and acknowledged, and for all practical purposes, the degree would now be part of pure and ancient Freemasonry, albeit as a graceful addition to the Fellowcraft degree. Members of the Bonaccord Mark Lodge and their supporters, however, had hoped and expected the marked degree to gain the same status and recognition that had been given by Grand Lodge to the Royal Arch. They reacted with anger at the fact that the marked degree had been relegated to just an addition to the Fellowcraft degree, even if a graceful addition. Feeling that this could be the end of the marked degree it was then known, they decided that something had to be done about it. At a special meeting of the Bonaccord Mark Lodge, a marginal note to the minutes states, final steps were taken to form a Grand Lodge of Mark Masters, and the Worshipful Master, Lord Lee, was invited to take the position of Grand Master of Mark Masonry in England. Therefore, 2 weeks before the next quarterly communication of the United Grand Lodge of England, Bonaccord Mark Lodge had begun to take steps to form a Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons. The Grand Master Thomas Dundas, the Earl of Zetland, presided over the next quarterly communication of Grand Lodge on the 4th of June 1856 in the Grand Temple at Freemasons Hall. The temple was crowded, probably with more Mark Masons than had ever been present before. Grand Lodge was opened in ample form, and the Grand Secretary rose to meet the minutes of the last regularly quarterly communication. Suddenly, without warning, there was an interruption, and John Henderson, President of the Board of General Purposes, a highly respected and senior Freemason, stood, saluted, and said, "Most worshipful Grand Master and brethren, the minutes that our brother Grand Secretary is about to read contain the confirmation of the acceptance of the marked degree as part of our craft ritual. This action on our part would undoubtedly constitute an illegal deviation from the landmarks of our order. It is not within the power of any one man or body of men to make such alterations to our rules and regulations. The acceptance of this change would certainly undermine the very foundations of Freemasonry. I propose, therefore, that the section of the minutes referring to the marked degree be deleted, and the vote about to be taken on the acceptance of the minutes exclude that section relevant to the marked degree." The motion was carried, and the response was met with enthusiastic applause and support from those present, many of whom were, of course, Mark Masons. The circumstances leading to the decision to reverse the minutes were certainly unique and without doubt unusual. There appears to be no precedent for such a decision being taken and confirmed at a meeting, and then being reversed at the time of the approval of the minutes. As to the claim of approval in Grand Lodge, this has been interpreted as a total rejection of the marked degree as being an addition to that of the Fellowcraft degree. Officially, the decision was said to have been brought about by a change of opinion, instigated by adherents to the original concept of Freemasonry, who considered that neither Grand Lodge nor any body of men had the power to make such drastic changes to the landmarks of the order, namely the inclusion of a new degree. However, not too many believed that this was the real reason the marked degree was not accepted as an addition to the Fellowcraft degree. The marked degree, rather than being rejected, was saved to posterity, and it was this fact that prompted such a determined response in Grand Lodge to the deletion of the relevant part of the minutes. There was a suggestion of complicity, if not conspiracy, between members of the Bonaccord Mark Lodge and John Henderson, but this has never been substantiated. What is quite evident is that the large majority of votes by which the proposition of Henderson was acclaimed, and the tumultuous applause at the decision taken, was one of relief and delight for members of the marked degree. It meant that the order was now set to be independent. Within 3 weeks of that quarterly communication on the 23rd of June 1856, the Grand Lodge of Mark Master Masons of England and Wales and the colonies and dependencies of the British Crown was founded, with William Henry, 2nd Lord Lee, as the first Grand Master. For some 23 years, there has been hostility between the Supreme Grand Chapter of Scotland and the newly formed English Grand Lodge. But gradually, Most marked lodges in England and Wales acceded or came under its authority. For many, the gain to marked masonry was a loss to the United Grand Lodge of England, but more importantly, the marked degree became independent and has since prospered, today being the largest Masonic order other than the Craft and the Royal Arch.